access to all the documents and to all the decision makers involved.
Yes, my honourable friend makes a very good point, well, two actually, about the importance of culture complementing rules, but also about the review that's being undertaken by Nigel Boardman. Nigel Boardman will be given all the details he needs about any contacts between individuals within government and those acting on behalf of Greensill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Cabinet Office Secretary says that he welcomed this question today, and for once I actually believe him, because there's nothing that he likes more than seeing the remaining shreds of the Prime Minister's credibility for probity being blown into the winds. But we know that he will look forward to an opportunity to finally get his own head down in that lavishly furnished apartment above number 10 Downing Street. So can he tell us, when we come to the next Conservative Party leadership contest, and once again he'll be persuaded to put his hat in the ring, is he really saying that the way that this government has operated is acceptable and is the way that we should really expect a government to operate? Is he really able to say that?
Yes.
Right, in which case let's go to Anthony Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last 12 months, honourable and right honourable members from both sides of the House have stood up and made sure the offers of support from local businesses have reached ministers at the right time in the right way, because that's how we've supported people across the country. So would my right honourable friend agree that doing that and making sure those offers got to the right place at the right time has been an important part of getting PPE and ventilators and vaccines to people across the United Kingdom when they needed them most?
My own friend is absolutely right. The government was operating, as all governments were to be fair, in difficult circumstances with a clear demand that we do everything possible to source PPE. And as has been pointed out, the overwhelming majority of the PPE that we sourced was sourced in a way that was rigorous, so that the equipment was fit for purpose, and so that those at the front line could benefit.
Let's go to Jamie Stone. Jamie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I wonder, does the Secretary of State agree with me that a version of a ministerial code should apply to the leaders of new political parties who might possibly be receiving payments from the arms of overseas governments who don't hold dear to their heart the best interests of the United Kingdom?
I don't want to embarrass the honourable gentleman too much by saying that almost every time he asks a question or makes a point in this House of Commons, I think how lucky his constituents are to have him as their Member of Parliament. And I think even though we disagree on many issues, he puts his finger on an important point of public scrutiny at this time as people decide how to cast their votes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree with me? There's only one party in this House that stands guilty of ignoring votes in a parliament to which it's responsible, that withholds legal advice, that spends thousands of pounds trying to cover its backs in a botched court case, and its leader has been found guilty by a cross-party committee of that parliament of misleading that parliament. Not this party, but the party of the honourable lady who brought this question today, the Scottish National Party, the real cosy sleepy cabal that's running Scotland at this time.
Well, I couldn't put it better myself. But what the surprising thing is, where are the SNP's MPs now? Now, some people might think that turning up, reading out a question, and then leaving before the debate was concluded was the perfect definition of a cynical political stunt, but I'll leave it for other people to decide.
Let's go to Drew Hendry. Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister is trying to say that there's absolutely nothing to see here over contracts for cronies, shady deals for decorating, text messages for tax breaks, and peerages for donations. If that's the case, aren't the public entitled to see this examined in a full, independent public inquiry? If not, what is he afraid of?
Well, there are a number of issues which might be, as I'm sure the honourable gentleman is aware, appropriately the subject of a full, independent public inquiry. We could all think of appropriate issues. But I would say, in response to the member for Glasgow Central, I ran through the points about PPE. I explained why it was that James Dyson had done so much in order to ensure that ventilators could be available to all. And it's also the case, as I mentioned to a number of members earlier, that an inquiry, of course, into the handling of the pandemic is appropriate, but the important thing is that we shouldn't preempt its findings.
Jackie Doyle-Price. If not, we'll go to Stephen Farrer. Stephen Farrer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In January 2020, the government was a party to the New Decade New Approach Agreement, which restored devolution to Northern Ireland. That agreement included a commitment to a panel of commissioners for ministerial standards. More recently, the Northern Ireland Assembly has given that role to the Assembly Commissioner for Standards. So why is the government prepared to support that much more rigorous approach to ministerial standards in Stormont, but not in Whitehall?
Minister.
Well, the honourable gentleman makes an important point, and it is the case that I applaud the cross-party working which Stormont has exhibited in making sure that the executive and ministers work well. But as I pointed out earlier, the independent advisor on ministerial standards we hope will be appointed very shortly, and it will be the case, of course, following on from a number of questions that have been put by right honourable and honourable members, that there will be an opportunity to review then what changes, if any, are needed in order to improve that role.
Steve Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure, like many members of this House, I've spent the last few days knocking on literally hundreds of doors across mid-Cornwall. And the residents of St Austell and Newquay raised a number of important issues with me. The rollout of the vaccine that is protecting them and their loved ones, the economic impact of the pandemic and what the government is doing to ensure we recover quickly, and the lifting of restrictions as we follow the roadmap that enables them to see their loved ones again and get back to life as normal in the coming weeks. The one thing nobody raised with me at all was the arrangements for refurbishing the Prime Minister's flat. So can my right honourable friend assure me that the Prime Minister and this government will remain focused on the things that really matter to the people of this country, which is getting through this pandemic and getting back to life as normal as quickly as possible?
He's spot on. Today I had meetings on the vaccine rollout, on making sure that our justice system operates more quickly after the pandemic, on making sure that we can deal with the backlogs in the NHS as a result of elective operations having to be put aside because of the pandemic, and also looking at how we can ensure that the educational opportunities of our young people, again, scarred by the pandemic, are restored. Now, I think, others may disagree, that those are all more important issues than curtains and soft furnishings. But I leave it to others to decide.
Let's go to Dame Angela Riedel. Dame Angela.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Dominic Cummings has described the Prime Minister's plans to get Tory donors to pay for the lavish refurbishment of the Downing Street flat as, and I'm quoting, unethical, foolish and illegal. So either the Prime Minister's former chief advisor is a liar and a fantasist, or the Prime Minister is not being entirely straightforward with the House or the country. Which is it?
Minister.
As someone once said in a different context, recollections may vary.
Mr. Speaker, now the question today relates to the Ministerial Code and, of course, to government ministers, but has my honourable friend reflected on the fact that while the honourable lady was asking her questions, a number of her own front bench colleagues are under the direct employ of prominent and well-known lobbying companies? Yeah. Does he agree with me? If we are to look at the Ministerial Code, we should also look at the rules governing shadow spokesmen. Yeah.
Well, that seems to be an important point and one for the House to consider.
Van Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In reply to my honourable friend, the member for Leeds West, the Minister made a virtue that the Prime Minister had paid for the refurbishment of the Downing Street flat. Now, there's been several weeks of speculation about this, and it was only last Friday that Downing Street confirmed that he had. So, could the Minister clarify, did the Prime Minister pay the original invoices for this, or did he reimburse the donors who donated money allegedly to this fund, or to the Conservative Party?
Minister Gove.
As I pointed out earlier, the Prime Minister paid for the renovation of the flat. All donations to the Prime Minister or any other member of Parliament, or indeed to political parties, will be declared appropriately and properly. And of course, the Cabinet Secretary also made clear in his interview with hearing with the PACAC committee the background to this issue.
Let's go to Bob Blackman. Bob.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend not find it ironic that the very self-same people that are attacking the government for the process of procurement were attacking the government for the slow process of actually achieving supplies of PPE and other equipment just about a year ago today? And isn't it right that actually the government has moved heaven and earth ministers and civil servants have worked literally through the night often to make sure that we get through this COVID pandemic as safely as we possibly can.
Minister. Yeah, the honourable gentleman makes, I think, a very, very fair point. It was the case, entirely legitimately and appropriately, that opposition members were criticising us for the slow procurement of PPE, and the Honourable Lady for Leeds West wrote to me in order to encourage us to go faster and made a number of suggestions about companies that we should follow up, which we did do. Now, the allegation is that when political figures pressed us to procure PPE more quickly for those at the front line, that was a mistake. So either the Labour's position last spring was wrong or the position now is wrong, but they both can't be right. But may I conclude by wishing the honourable gentleman a happy birthday. It is, I understand, a very significant date, but I'm afraid the Official Secrets Act forbids me from revealing how significant.
West Street.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We all know that the delay in locking down the country in lockdown 1, lockdown 2 and lockdown 3 led to a higher toll, both in terms of lives and livelihoods. What I don't think anyone expected was to read on the front page of the Daily Mail today the quote that the Prime Minister said, "Let the bodies pile high in their thousands," a claim which has been subsequently verified independently by other journalists. So I think the Minister takes statements he makes at that dispatch box more seriously than the Prime Minister does. So can I ask him again to be absolutely categorical that he has never heard the Prime Minister say those words, that the Prime Minister didn't say those words, and that prior to arriving in the House this afternoon, he received assurances from the Prime Minister that he didn't use those words. Can he be absolutely clear and straightforward and honest about that?
Totally. As I pointed out earlier in response to the question from the member, I think, for Aberdeen South, I made the point that I had been in a meeting in the Cabinet room with the Prime Minister. I would ordinarily go into discussions that take place in Cabinet committees for reasons that he would well understand. But I never heard the Prime Minister say any such thing. We were all wrestling with an incredibly difficult decision. The decision to lock down necessarily imposes costs in other ways, as we're all aware. But the Prime Minister not only concluded at the end of the discussion that we had, which was a sober, serious and detailed discussion, that it was necessary to have that second lockdown. He also concluded, of course, that it was necessary, sadly, to have a third lockdown as well.
Let's go to Anna Bowdell. Anna.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to Opinion for the Observer, 53% of people in Scotland think that the Prime Minister is corrupt. Whether it's COVID contracts for his cronies, peerages for his pals, or tax breaks over text, the Prime Minister is leading a government that is rotten to the core and fast losing public trust. Any healthy democracy must have leaders with credibility. So will the Minister do the right thing, ensure a public inquiry happens and recognise that people in Scotland have a right to decide their own future, a future free from Tory sleaze and corruption that they did not vote for?
Minister Gove.
Well, I think we're grateful for that party election broadcast. I think the most important thing to stress is that on each of the detailed questions raised, quite understandably, by her honourable friend, the member for Glasgow Central, I explained the position, and it is not as the SNP would wish it to be.
Let's go to the final question with Rachel Hopkins. Rachel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've seen a growing divergence between what government ministers say in public and their true intentions that they share in private. And the public deserves to know what the Prime Minister said to Manchester United's Ed Woodward in a meeting before the European Super League was announced, as it seems the Prime Minister gave the impression that he has supported the plans. Without full transparency, questions remain about the Prime Minister's potential breach of the Ministerial Code and Nolan Principles. So can the Minister commit the government to publish all details relating to this meeting?
Minister.
Well, I think it was clear from what the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State for the Department of Culture, Media and Sport said in the wake of the suggestion that there should be a European Super League, that they were wholly opposed to that venture. My understanding, I wasn't there at the time, is that the conversation with Ed Woodward of Manchester United related to the broader opening up of sporting events and what the necessary social distancing or other measures might be in order to allow more of us to enjoy being able to go back to football matches.
I'm now suspending the House for 3 minutes to enable necessary arrangements for the next business to be made. Order. Order. I now call Andrew Mitchell to ask his urgent question. Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting this urgent question. Can I ask the Minister if he will make a statement on the reduction in overseas development assistance?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the right honourable gentleman for his question. The pandemic has resulted in the biggest drop in UK economic output in 300 years, and it has had a major impact on public finances. The deficit this year is projected to be double its peak during the financial crisis. That's why we had to take the tough, but I can assure him temporary, decision at the end of last year to reduce the official development assistance target from 0.7% of GNI to 0.5%. In spite of this, the UK will spend £10 billion on aid in 2021, making us the third largest donor in the G7 as a percentage of our gross national income. Not only that, but we will also be the third largest bilateral humanitarian donor, spending at least £906 million this year. And we will invest at least £400 million bilaterally on girls' education in over 25 countries. We will deliver £534 million of bilateral spend on climate and biodiversity, a doubling of the average spend between 2016 and 2020. We have committed £548 million to COVAX to provide vaccines for poorer countries, and we are multiplying our impact by integrating our aid spend with our diplomatic network, our science and technology expertise, and our economic partnerships. This government's commitment to the UK being a leader in development has not changed. The integrated review reaffirmed our pledge to fight against global poverty and to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. And we reiterate our commitment to return to 0.7% when the fiscal situation allows. This week's new allocations show that we are following through with the vision that the Prime Minister set out in the integrated review. The way the UK applies our world-leading investment and our expertise must be strategic, in line with the approach defined by the integrated review. It must represent best value for taxpayers' money, and it must deliver results by tackling poverty and improving people's lives around the world. To achieve this, the FCDO has conducted a thorough review of aid spending to ensure that we target every penny at the highest priority global challenges. The Foreign Secretary's written statement to the House last week set out how this has sharpened the focus of the FCDO's aid portfolio behind 7 strategic priorities for poverty reduction. These are climate and biodiversity, COVID-19 and global health security, girls' education, humanitarian preparedness and response, science and technology, open societies and conflict resolution, and finally economic development and trade. We believe that this plan will deliver the greatest impact where it matters most.
Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When Germany will now exceed the 0.7 target, when France is now pledged to hit it, and the US is increasing aid spending by $15 billion, why is Britain, chair of the G7, breaking its promises to the poorest and the election manifesto commitment on which we were all elected, and which this country previously has so proudly upheld? Does the government understand that the aid cut to Syria undermines our key ally in the Middle East, Jordan, and will increase the flow of refugees into Europe? Does the government realise that sending 300 troops to Mali while cutting humanitarian aid to the Sahel is a failure of understanding and puts our troops at greater risk? Why is the government derailing our Prime Minister's pledge on girls' education, with cuts that will result in 4 million fewer girls going to school, while Britain is simultaneously hosting an international replenishment conference asking others to fund this key British objective? Madam Deputy Speaker, the 0.7 is not just a commitment to the world's poorest, enshrined in law by this House. It is a reflection of the kind of country we aspire to be and the values which we uphold. 95% of Red Wall voters approve of life-saving humanitarian aid, but that is exactly what the Treasury is cutting in their name. We are cutting £500 million in humanitarian aid. This will mean that 3 million women and children will not now receive life-saving support. Madam Deputy Speaker, is it not clear that the original estimate of 100,000 souls who will die as a result is now a tragic understatement? This dreadful political, not economic, decision shames our country and our government. Madam Deputy Speaker, it should shame us all.
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I completely understand the passion with which my right honourable friend speaks, but the simple truth is that the UK economy is 11.3% smaller than it was last year and is undergoing the worst economic contraction for 300 years. The coronavirus has set in place a unique set of circumstances to which we are forced to respond. And yet, despite these difficulties, despite this economic impact, the UK will remain, in both absolute terms and percentage terms, one of the largest ODA donor countries in the world, and will remain the third largest ODA donor in the G7. He speaks of the areas where the UK wishes to be a force for good in the world, and we are still committed. We are absolutely committed to make sure that we use our ODA spend in the areas like girls' education, the environment and climate and others, but with our diplomatic efforts as part of the joint Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office as a force multiplier to ensure that the money we spend is amplified by our diplomatic efforts, both bilaterally and on the world stage. And I will remind him that when the fiscal circumstances allow, we are committed to returning to the 0.7% of GNI, which he, others, and indeed this government is so rightly proud.
We now go by video link to Preet Kaur Gill.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last week, the Foreign Secretary exposed his fear of scrutiny by trying to sneak out a written statement on his callous aid cuts. Today, having been forced to come to face up to his decisions by the Right Honourable Member for Sutton Coldfield, he has once again evaded scrutiny and hidden behind one of his ministers instead. Make no mistake, slashing humanitarian support in the middle of a global pandemic is callous and incredibly short-sighted. People will lose their lives as a result of the cuts, and we will all be less safe. And as the only G7 nation to cut aid, it is a retreat from our moral duty and will weaken our position on the world stage. The statement last week was light on detail. So can the ministers tell us whether ambassadors have been informed of their allocated budgets and the date when all FCDO country office budgets for 2021 will be made public? Can he tell us whether impact assessments for each country will be conducted and when they will be forthcoming? And can he explain the Foreign Secretary's comments that no one is going hungry because we haven't signed checks? 16 million Yemenis and 12 million Syrian people are on the brink of famine. How does he think the respective 60% and 30% cuts in aid will impact people in those countries? The impact of the cuts on his government's own stated priorities are stark, from education, which has been cut by 40%, to health programmes like the IRC's Saving Lives in Sierra Leone, which has helped over 3 million people and now been cut by 60%. In a year when Britain will be hosting the G7 and COP26, this is a shameful act and part of a pattern of retreat from the world stage by this Conservative government. So rather than continuing to treat Parliament with contempt, will he commit to putting these cuts to a vote at the earliest opportunity?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, she speaks about my right honourable friend attempting to avoid scrutiny, which would carry a bit more credibility had it not been for the fact he specifically put the written ministerial statement in the public domain ahead of his appearance at the International Development Committee, so that that committee could grill him on the statement he just made. The point that she makes about our commitment to overseas development and overseas assistance, I'll remind her of the answer I gave a few minutes ago. We are facing an unprecedented set of circumstances. I would remind her that this is one of the, if not the most difficult economic years the country has faced in a number of centuries. And even against that backdrop, we are committed to 0.5% of GNI, a figure which former Labour governments only managed to hit a couple of times in the most benign economic circumstances. And so I am proud of the fact that this government remains committed to being one of the most generous aid donors in the world, and as I say, to link our diplomatic efforts with our development efforts to maximise the force for good in the world that we can bring about.
Sir Peter Bottomley.
The first British government to commit to point 7 was the year I first stood for Parliament. They had reached the target when they could. It took 39 years. The Minister's prepared statement says the government intends to get back to point 7 when circumstances allow. I think if they said next year, the House would understand in part. But as he hasn't, we have to assume it's going to be more than a year. A minister said the UK aid strategy sits firmly in our security and defence strategy. The 0.7% on international aid and the 2% commitment to NATO, the 2.7% we spend in our international interests on securing a safer, more stable and more prosperous world. Will the Minister first of all say how much would be saved by this reduction of the economy, the 11.2% he referred to? That would be a big cut, but it's provided for in legislation. And can he kindly read out the words that the present Prime Minister reinforced in our 2019 manifesto when he proudly added the word proudly to the commitment, repeating what was said by 2 previous Conservative Prime Ministers?
Minister.
I completely understand the point that he makes. No one could have predicted the once-in-a-generation health and economic event that was coronavirus 19, and we have had to take unprecedented action to respond to that. I can personally attest to the passion that both my right honourable friends, the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister, have for the priorities that we have set out in the response to my right honourable friend's question. The reason that we have not set a specific date to the point when we will get back up to 0.7% is because none of us can predict. This is a genuinely unprecedented set of circumstances. The quicker we can get the British economy back into shape, the quicker we can get back to being committing to development expenditure at the level I think that we would all want to be at.
Thank you. We now go by video link to Chris Law.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last week, the Minister not only admitted that 60% cuts would fall on Yemen, the world's worst humanitarian disaster, but also that there had been no impact assessment undertaken. He shamefully hid behind the pitiful excuse of needing to make difficult decisions. Was it a difficult decision to use this money to deliver a windfall for the defence budget and increase spending on nuclear weapons? Or was it simply an ideological decision that everyone can see clearly through? The global COVID pandemic should not be used as an excuse to cut aid. Indeed, it's our essential duty to increase support to the world's most vulnerable during this crisis. While this government is intent on breaking their manifesto commitment to maintain the 0.7% target, the SNP is pledged to increase the Scottish Government's aid budget by 50% if re-elected next week. Indeed, the rest of the G7 increased their aid spending as a result of COVID, and over 200 NGOs have accused this government of delivering, and I quote, a tragic blow to the world's poorest people. Does the Minister believe that the G7 and all these NGOs are wrong, and the UK government is right? And if this is not further proof that the reality of global Britain is indeed rather little Britain?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I will remind the honourable gentleman that the UK remains, in both absolute terms and percentage of GNI terms, one of the most generous ODA donating countries in the world. He mentions the impact of coronavirus. The UK has invested or donated over £500 million to support COVAX in order to help vaccinate the poorest countries in the world. In addition to that, we have commitments for both science and technology and health preparedness as priorities. The UK government has had to make, and He can shake his head if he wishes, but the simple fact is the UK government has had to deal with an unprecedented, once in a 300-year economic as well as health event, and we have to respond, but we do so in a way that maintains our commitment to the poorest in the world.
Theresa May. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The integrated review identifies the United Kingdom as a soft power superpower, citing as one of the reasons our contribution to international development. Exactly how is that position going to be enhanced by the action of cutting aid to the world's poorest, including those in slavery? And I note slavery was not even referred to in the written statement issued by the Foreign Secretary last week. Minister.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right that the UK is viewed globally as a soft power superpower. In the conversations that I have had since the announcements have been made, demonstrates that the international community still very much sees the UK as a soft power superpower. Our development expenditure is an important part of that, and that is why we are committed to get back to 0.7% when the fiscal situation allows. And we will continue to work with partners and to lobby and to coordinate and to convene our international friends and partners to support poorest in the world. We won't step back from that just because of the temporary financial situation we find ourselves in. I can assure her that she and I, and I'm, as I say, the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary are as one, that we aspire to be a global leader in soft power and in development, and we will recover back up to 0.7% as soon as the fiscal situation allows.
We now go by video link to Sarah Champion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over the last 12 months, this government have asset stripped our foreign aid programme and along with it done serious damage to the UK's global standing, security and soft power. All this was done without consultation or scrutiny by this House or the aid sector. And to be quite honest, I'm staggered that the Minister tries to justify scrutiny of this House by sneaking out a statement last Wednesday before my committee the following morning. So can the Minister please tell us the date when this House will be told the funding allocation for AIDS project by countries, and also when he will publish the impact assessment that should have been done alongside it?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I say, the written ministerial statement was put out in order that her committee would be able to scrutinise the Foreign Secretary. It is unusual, perhaps even unprecedented, to set out thematic allocations at the beginning of the financial year, as the Foreign Secretary has done via his written ministerial statement last week and in his IDC evidence. Detailed information about how we will spend ODA is usually set out in the statistics on the international development process in the year following the spend, and programme by programme information is also published on DevTracker. We've tried to be as open and transparent as we are able to. Clearly, we are in the process of still making detailed decisions, so we've informed the House and her committee of as much detail as we're able to at this point. And as we go through country by country and theme by theme, more details will be forthcoming.
And now we go to Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm intrigued to hear the comment that this is a challenge that will return to the 0.7 as soon as possible, because of course the Minister realises, like everybody else in this House, that the rest of the world is not standing still. Others are filling the gaps that we leave, and votes in the United Nations and different support elements are going according to those power dynamics. Could the Minister assure me that the decisions that are being taken will be in keeping with the other decisions that Foreign Office is taking in reinforcing our bilateral interests, in defending British people abroad, and making sure that things like COVID do not have pools of disease around the world in which they can develop further? Because of course aid spending isn't actually about foreigners, it's about us. It's about supporting the world we live in and making sure we're able to communicate, to travel and to operate around the world. Will he assure me that that integration will make sure that although we are committed legally to multilaterals, we will not forget the bilateral commitments we've made, which are so much more easily dropped?
Minister.
My honourable friend makes an incredibly important point, and the UK is proud of the role that it plays in multilateral fora around the world, and we are a leading player in many of them. But we are also very conscious that we have incredibly important, long-standing bilateral relationships around the world. And I'm very proud of the fact that we have maintained both our commitments to multilaterals, but also both through ODA and also through our diplomatic channels, our very strong set of bilateral relationships. And he's right to highlight that both matter, both are incredibly important to our partners around the world, but also, as he says, the interests of the people here in the UK as well.
And now we go by video link to Leila Moran.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Announcing these deep, potentially unlawful aid cuts through a written statement was cowardly. But in the context of coronavirus, it's also incredibly short-sighted. Chile, Brazil, India, here, we have seen what happens when new variants emerge and then countries become overwhelmed. And every time it happens, the virus then mutates even faster. Last week, the all-party group on coronavirus heard that these cuts will likely result in hurting scientists' ability to catch these new variants abroad, variants that may well threaten our own recovery here. So while 1.3 billion has been allocated to coronavirus and global health, there's been no detail on the country-specific allocations to this aid. So can the Minister provide that clarity now? And can he assure the House that he does understand no one is safe until everyone is safe?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the UK has been a leading country in terms of funding of COVAX to ensure that poorer countries in the world have got vaccinations as part of their arsenal to defend against coronavirus. We have a globally enviable ability to analyse and sequence mutations, information which we share with the world. She is absolutely right that no one is safe until everyone is safe, and that is why we are so very proud of the research that's happened here in the UK, which is being shared globally through the COVAX and Gavi processes, and also that we are committing to a significant investment in science and technology and research as part of our ODA expenditure for the very reasons that she outlines.
Pauline Latham.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could I just put the Minister right that the Foreign Secretary put out the statement at 5 o'clock the night before we met at 9 o'clock, so he didn't give much time for anybody to digest what was in it, and there wasn't much in it to start with. Can I say that I am deeply saddened and very upset that we are going to be balancing the books in this country on the backs of the poorest in the world. But what I'd like to ask him is, when is the government going to come clean and be honest about where these cuts to life-saving humanitarian aid will fall? How many women and children will die as a result? Is it more or is it less than the 100,000 estimated by the leading think tanks and NGOs?
Just before the Minister answers the question, I must make a plea. It would be good